Mira always chose the last row of the small cafe where she worked, even when she was off her shift. It was the only place she could sit quietly with her small keyboard and practice without feeling like the world was staring at her. She liked blending into the background. She liked listening to the soft sounds of the customers, the clinking of cups, the low hum of conversations. It made practicing easier because it reminded her of home, busy, warm, and always a little noisy. Mira had taught herself to play the piano using an old keyboard that barely worked. A few keys stuck sometimes, and some made a buzzing sound if she pressed too hard. But she loved it anyway. She never complained about its flaws. It was the closest thing she had to a real piano. Every night, after she finished wiping tables and stacking chairs, she stayed behind for a few minutes just to play something short and simple. Music made her feel alive, even on the days when nothing else did. She had a dream that she kept tucked deep inside her heart, a dream to learn music properly, to study under someone who could guide her. But dreams like that felt too big for someone like her. Lessons cost money she did not have. Her shifts at the cafe paid just enough for rent and groceries, and even then she had to count every coin. One cold afternoon, everything changed in a way she did not expect. The cafe owner walked in with a stack of flyers in his hand, calling out to the staff to gather round. Mira wiped her hands on her apron and stepped closer. "Listen to this," he said with excitement. "A world-famous pianist is coming to the city to host a masterclass. His name is Leonard Voss. He'll be picking a few young musicians to mentor for free. Anyone can audition." The staff reacted immediately, gasping and whispering as if a movie star had arrived in town. Even Mira felt her heart jump. She had heard of Leonard Voss, of course. Anyone who loved the piano knew his name. He was known for his incredible skill, his flawless technique, and his legendary concerts. His videos online had millions of views. When he played, it felt like the world paused for a moment. But he was also known for something else: his sharp tongue and his habit of speaking, without considering how much his words could hurt. Many people admired his talent, but feared his personality. "Mira, you should go," one of her co-workers said. "You're always playing back there in the corner. Imagine if he picked you." Another co-worker chimed in with a grin. "She's shy, but she's good. I've heard her play after closing. You should try. Nothing to lose, right?" Mira felt her face warm. Compliments always made her uneasy. She never knew how to react. She looked at the flyer the owner was holding. The words "open auditions" were printed in bold. Anyone could sign up. It didn't say you had to be trained or had to come from a music school. Still, she hesitated. "I don't know," she said softly. "I'm not ready. And he's a huge pianist. Someone like him wouldn't be interested in someone like me." "Stop that," her co-worker said, waving a hand. "Talent is talent. You have something special. Why not give it a shot?" The cafe owner placed the flyer in her hands. "Just think about it. If you go, great. If you don't, that's fine too. But opportunities like this don't come often." Mira nodded politely, though inside her chest, a small storm had begun to brew. She folded the flyer and slipped it into her apron pocket. All through her shift, her thoughts drifted again and again to the idea of auditioning. The thought scared her, but it also excited her. For the first time, something felt possible, even if the possibility was tiny. That night, after her shift ended, she sat down at her small keyboard in the back corner. She placed her fingers gently on the worn keys and began to play the simple piece. She had been practicing for a week. It was slow and soft, almost fragile, but it carried a feeling she could not express in words. As she played, she tried to imagine what it would feel like to stand in front of a real pianist like Leonard Voss. Would she freeze? Would she forget how to move her fingers? Would he laugh at her? The more she thought about it, the more afraid she felt. But something else also lingered, a quiet, persistent voice inside her asking, "What if you try? Just once?" When she finished practicing, she stayed seated for a long moment, staring at her hands. Those hands had worked long hours, scrubbed tables, carried plates, and counted change. They weren't the hands of someone who grew up with teachers or grand pianos. They were tired hands, but they were strong. They remembered every melody she had ever taught herself. The next morning, she took the flyer out of her apron and read it again. The audition would be held in 3 days. She still had time to prepare. She spent those next 3 nights practicing longer than usual. Even after she reached home, she played on her small keyboard until her fingers felt stiff. She didn't tell anyone at home about the audition. She wanted to keep it to herself, like a quiet secret. If she failed, She didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her. By the third night, she finally made up her mind. She would audition. She would do it not because she believed she could win, but because she wanted to know what it felt like to stand on a real stage, even if only for a few minutes. On the day of the audition, Mira woke up early. She wore a simple outfit, nothing fancy. Her clothes were neat, her hair tied back. She held her sheet music tightly in her hand as she made her way to the large music hall where the auditions were being held. The building felt intimidating, with tall glass doors and shining floors that reflected her nervous footsteps. Many young musicians were already there, dressed well and carrying polished instruments. Some practiced in corners, their movements confident and smooth. Mira found an empty seat near the back and sat quietly, listening to the sounds around her. Violins warming up, a flute player humming scales, a few pianists practicing finger exercises on imaginary keyboards. She suddenly felt small, like she did not belong in a place like this. When her name was finally called, her heart thumped so hard she felt it in her throat. She walked toward the audition room with trembling legs. Inside, a grand piano set under bright lights. 3 judges sat behind a long table, and among them was Leonard Voss himself. He looked exactly like he did in video's sharp suit, sharp eyes, and an expression that made it hard to know what he was thinking. He glanced at her sheet music, then at her. "You may begin," he said in a tone that felt both bored and impatient. Mira took a deep breath and sat at the piano. The bench was softer than she expected. The keys looked perfect and smooth, nothing like the ones she practiced on every night. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play. But the moment the first note escaped the piano, something inside her tightened. Her nerves rushed back all at once. Her hands shook, her timing slipped. The piece she had practiced so many times suddenly felt foreign. She made a mistake. Then another. A soft, embarrassed heat crept up her neck. She heard a quiet chuckle from somewhere behind the judges' table. She didn't know if it was one of them or someone else in the room, but it shook her. When she finished, she kept her gaze low. She didn't want to see their faces for a moment. The room was silent. Then Leonard Voss said flatly, "Thank you." That will be all. She knew what that meant. She knew she had failed. She bowed her head slightly, gathered her sheet music, and walked out outside the hall. She sat on a bench and let out a shaky breath. She felt disappointed, embarrassed, and foolish for thinking she had a chance. But even though the audition had gone terribly, something inside her whispered again, this is not the end. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she could not let this one failed moment erase everything she had worked for. And somewhere deep in her heart, a quiet spark still glowed, small, but not yet gone. Mira walked home slowly after the audition, her steps heavy and her mind clouded with doubt. The cold air brushed against her face, but she barely felt it. All she could think about was the way Leonard Voss had looked at her, bored, unimpressed, and completely sure she did not belong in that room. His simple words, "That will be all," kept echoing in her head. She wished he had said something else, even if it was harsh. Silence had hurt more. When she reached home, she placed her sheet music on the table and stared at it. She felt like tearing it apart, but she didn't. Instead, she sat quietly, breathing slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. Her fingers gently touched the edges of the paper, as if reminding herself that she still cared about music, even if the world didn't care about her. Later that evening, after washing the dishes and folding laundry, she sat in her small room with her keyboard. She looked at it for a long moment before touching a key. The sound came out uneven, familiar, and comforting, but she didn't play. Not tonight. Her hands felt too heavy. The next day at the cafe, her co-workers noticed she looked tired. "Did it not go well?" one of them asked softly. She smiled a little, but it was the kind of smile that carried sadness behind it. "It was okay," she said, choosing not to describe the whole thing. "You tried, and that's something," another co-worker said kindly. "Not everyone has the courage to stand in front of someone like him." Mira nodded, appreciating their support, even if the disappointment still sat deep inside her chest. She wished she had played better. She wished she had shown even a piece of her true ability. But wishing couldn't change anything now. After her shift ended, she walked toward the back corner of the cafe where her little keyboard always waited. She sat down. But before she could begin, a soft voice interrupted. "Not practicing today?" Mira looked up to see an older man sitting at a nearby table, sipping tea. He had a gentle face, silver hair, and calm eyes that seemed to understand things without needing explanations. "Oh, I'm just a little tired," she said shyly. "I've heard you play many times," he said with a warm smile. "You have a soft touch on the keys. Very rare." Mira blinked in surprise. No one had ever said something so thoughtful about her playing. I don't think I'm that good," she whispered. He shook his head lightly. "No, you have something inside your music, feeling. It's not something you can learn from a book." She didn't know what to say. Compliments made her nervous, but this one felt different. It felt sincere. The man took another sip of tea before continuing. "You looked upset today. Something on your mind?" Mira hesitated. She didn't usually share personal things with strangers, but something about his gentle tone made her feel safe. "I auditioned yesterday," she said quietly, "for a famous pianist's masterclass." "Ah," he said, nodding with understanding. "And it didn't go the way you hoped?" Mira lowered her eyes and shook her head. "My hands were shaking. I made mistakes." He didn't think I belonged there. The man watched her for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "Many great musicians fail their first big moment, sometimes more than once. But he didn't even give me a chance," she said softly. "He didn't say anything except that will be all." The man chuckled gently. "That sounds like him. Leonard Voss is brilliant, but he is not known for kindness." Mira stared at him, surprised. "You know him?" The man nodded. "I used to teach piano many years ago. I met him once at a music event. He was the same then, sharp tongue, quick judgments." She didn't know whether to feel better or worse about that. The man continued. "People like him judge by first impressions. They see nerves as weakness. But nerves only mean you care." Mira breathed slowly. She had never thought of it that way. After a quiet moment, the older man shifted in his seat. "If you're willing, I can help you." She blinked. "Help me," he nodded. "I can guide you. Not for money. Just because I enjoy seeing young musicians grow. You have something special, and it shouldn't fade because of one bad day." Mira felt her heart tremble slightly. She didn't know what to say at first. No one had ever offered her something like this. Why would you help me?" she asked softly. The man smiled at her question, a slow and gentle smile. "Because years ago, someone helped me when I was in your place. I want to pass it on." His kindness touched her. She nodded slowly. "I would like that. Thank you." That evening, they began their first practice session. The man moved to sit beside her at the small keyboard. He asked her to play the piece she had attempted at the audition. Her hands were still nervous, but she played. This time, the room was warm and calm. No bright lights, no judges, no cold expressions. Just her, the keyboard, and someone who believed she could do better. When she finished, he didn't criticize. He didn't point out mistakes harshly. Instead, he spoke softly. "You have emotion," he said, "but you hide it. Music needs trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in your hands. Trust in the sound you create. Don't shrink when you play. Let the music breathe." For the next several days, he taught her things she had never known. Simple exercises to strengthen her fingers, techniques to control her breathing, ways to relax her shoulders so the tension would not freeze her movements. But the most important thing he taught her was confidence. He made her play the same piece again and again, not to perfect it, but to help her feel safe with it. Slowly, Mira began to change. Her hands shook less. Her timing improved. She played with more feeling, more courage. One evening, after practicing for an hour, he asked, "Do you write your own music?" She hesitated. "A little. I have a few pieces, but they're not very good." "Play one for me," he said gently. Mira bit her lip. She had never shown her personal compositions to anyone. They felt too private, too close to her heart. But the look in his eyes gave her courage. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play a soft tune she had written months ago. It was simple and warm, filled with emotions she didn't know how to share in words. When she finished, the man sat quietly for a moment. "That," he said slowly, "is your voice." "My voice, yes. Anyone can copy a famous pianist. But your own music, that is something only you can create. Never hide it." His words felt like sunlight in her chest. She had never thought of her own music as something meaningful. They continued practicing every day. As the weeks passed, her confidence grew. She found comfort in the small cafe corner where she practiced. Sometimes customers would pause to listen. Sometimes the owner would smile proudly. Sometimes her co-workers would clap softly. One evening, while she played her own tune, the cafe became unusually quiet. People stopped their conversations. Even the sound of dishes slowed. Mira didn't notice at first because she was lost in the melody. But when she finished, she looked up and saw people smiling at her, nodding, even clapping. Her face warmed with embarrassment, but also with happiness. For the first time, strangers had felt her music after closing that night. The older man said, "You're ready to show the world a different side of you." Mira blinked. "What do you mean?" "There's a performance event coming up," he said. "A small one. Nothing like the audition hall you went to. But it's a chance to play for an audience again." Her stomach tightened. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that. But she also remembered how she felt the day she walked out of that audition, small, discouraged, an invisible dot. She didn't want to feel that way again. "What if I fail?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Failing is not the problem. Not trying is." She breathed deeply and nodded. "I'll try." The older man smiled. "Good. And this time, play your own music." Mira's heart fluttered. She had always hidden her own compositions, afraid they were not good enough. But something had changed inside her. Maybe she was ready. As she walked home that night, the city lights reflected softly on the roads. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not loud or bold, but quiet and steady, like a small flame that refused to go out. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would ever stand on a stage with confidence or earn the respect of someone like Leonard Voss. But she knew this. She was not giving up, not anymore. Mira spent the next week thinking about the small performance event the older man had told her about. It wasn't a competition, just a community showcase where anyone could go up and play. But even knowing that, she felt nervous every time she imagined herself sitting in front of a room full of strangers. The last time she had played in front of people, her hands had betrayed her, and her confidence had crumbled. Still, she wanted to move forward. She wanted to try again, not to prove anything to Leonard Voss or anyone else, but to herself. Every evening after her cafe shift, she practiced with the older man seated beside her. He never pushed her too hard. He always reminded her to breathe, to feel the music instead of fearing it, to trust her hands instead of doubting them. Slowly, her fear began to loosen its grip. "You're improving," he said one night as she finished playing her own composition. "Not just the notes. Your heart is coming through." Mira looked down at her hands. She still didn't fully believe in her talent, but hearing his words warmed her more than she expected. What if people don't like my music?" she asked quietly. The older man smiled. "Music is not about pleasing everyone. It's about speaking honestly. Someone will hear you. Someone always does." That night, Mira walked home with a new kind of determination in her step. Maybe she wasn't ready for the world, but she could start with a small room full of strangers. Maybe that was enough. As the day of the event approached, Mira practiced every spare moment she had. During breaks at the cafe, she would tap her fingers lightly on the table, softly rehearsing the rhythm. At home, she played until her arms felt tired, but she didn't mind. She wanted to go on stage knowing she had done everything she could. When the morning of the performance arrived, Mira woke up early. She felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. She dressed simply but neatly, tying her hair back in a small braid. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "You can do this." It was the first time she had ever said something encouraging to her own reflection. At the cafe, her co-workers cheered her on. "Good luck, Mira," one said. "You'll do great." Another added. She smiled shyly and thanked them, trying to hold on to their positivity. After her shift, she met the older man outside the community hall where the event was being held. The building was smaller than the music hall she had auditioned in, less intimidating. Soft lights glowed through the windows, and the sound of people chatting filled the air. "You're ready," the older man said gently. Mira nodded, though her stomach felt tight. "I'll try my best." Inside, chairs were set up neatly in rows. A small upright piano stood at the front. People sat with warm smiles, chatting quietly. There were families, elderly couples, young children who swung their legs excitedly. It wasn't a professional audience, just regular people who loved music. That made Mira feel a little better. The event began with a young boy playing a cheerful tune on a violin. Then a teenager sang a soft song. Next, a woman played a flute piece she had learned for her daughter's birthday. Everyone clapped kindly after each performance. Mira's turn came sooner than she expected, and next, the host announced, "We have Mira, who will be playing an original piece." Hearing the words "original piece" made her heartbeat quicken. Her steps felt heavier as she walked toward the piano. The older man gave her a gentle nod from his seat. She sat down on the small bench and placed her hands on her lap for a moment, trying to calm the nervous trembling. She took a slow breath, remembering everything the older man had taught her. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first note felt shaky, but she didn't stop. She let the melody unfold the way it always did when she was alone, soft at first, then gradually fuller, like a warm story being told. As she played, the room grew quiet. Her nerves softened, replaced by a distant calm. She remembered the nights she had practiced alone, the nights she had whispered her worries to the keys, the nights she had dreamed of a life where music wasn't just a hidden part of her. Her fingers flowed naturally now. The melody rose gently, carrying her emotions with it. She didn't think about who was watching or listening. She didn't think about her mistakes or her past failures. For a few minutes, it was just her and the music. When the final note faded, Mira stayed still for a heartbeat, almost afraid to look up. Then she heard it, soft clapping, then louder, not explosive like a grand concert, but genuine, warm, real. She lifted her head and saw smiling faces. Some people nodded with appreciation. A few whispered to each other with impressed expressions. The older man looked at her proudly. "You see," he said when she returned to her seat. "You were heard." Mira felt a deep relief wash over her. For the first time, she felt like her music mattered. Even just a little. After the event, a few people approached her. "That was lovely," one woman said. "Your music is so calming," said another. A little girl tugged at her sleeve. "I liked your song," she said shyly. Mira knelt down slightly and smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot." Walking home that night, the world felt softer. The streetlights seemed brighter, the air felt lighter, and the path felt less lonely. She hugged her sheet music against her chest. "You did it," she whispered to herself. The older man walked beside her, hands in his pockets. "Now you know you can stand in front of people," he said. "You have something worth sharing." Mira nodded. "I want to keep learning. I want to get better." "And you will," he said. "But there is something you should know." She looked up at him curiously. "There's a special concert coming soon," he explained. "A charity event where local talents are invited to perform alongside trained musicians. It's not small like today, but it's still open to anyone brave enough to try." Mira felt her heart flutter again. The idea scared her, but it also excited her. "Do you think I should try?" she asked. The older man smiled kindly. "I think you're ready to challenge yourself again." She didn't answer right away. She needed to breathe it in, think about it, let the idea settle. When she reached her home, she looked at her keyboard. She touched the keys lightly, letting a soft chord ring out. She remembered the harsh moment with Leonard Voss. She remembered the embarrassment and the sting of his dismissive tone. But she also remembered what she had achieved tonight. She wasn't the same girl who walked out of that audition hall feeling small. She was growing. Over the next few days, Mira and the older man practiced more intensely. He taught her how to control nerves through breathing exercises. He helped her adjust her hand movements for better flow. He encouraged her to practice her own pieces, not just others. "You have a voice in your music," he reminded her again and again. "Let it grow." Mira played until her arms felt heavy, but her heart felt light. Some nights, the cafe owner would listen quietly from afar. "You're improving," he said one evening. "Your music feels different now, stronger." Her co-workers cheered her on, teasing her gently, but also supporting her without question. "Don't forget us when you become famous." One joked. Mira laughed softly. "I'm far from famous." But for the first time, she didn't completely reject the idea. She allowed herself to dream a little. The night before the charity concert sign-ups, Mira sat alone at the cafe keyboard after closing. She played her melody slowly, gently, feeling each note settle in her heart. She thought about the small girl who had complimented her. She thought about the older man who believed in her. She thought about the quiet room that had listened to her with warmth. Then she thought about Leonard Voss. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just with determination. She whispered, "Next time, I'll be ready." And for the first time since the audition, she truly believed it. The days that followed the unexpected rehearsal were strange for her. She felt lighter, yet more unsure. The famous pianist had walked out without a word, no comment, no insult, no joke thrown her way. It was as if the music had spoken for her. But silence from someone like him felt even heavier than mockery. She didn't know whether she had impressed him, annoyed him, or simply confused him. That uncertainty played again and again in her thoughts. She tried to push those thoughts away and return to her routine. She worked part-time, helped her mother with chores, and spent her evenings practicing on her old keyboard. The instrument had long lost its warmth, and sometimes a key would stick, but she still played it as if it were a grand piano. It was the only place where her heart felt truly open. One evening, while she practiced the piece the famous pianist had interrupted weeks earlier, She found herself stopping midway. She touched the keys lightly, hesitating. Something didn't feel right. The melody wasn't flowing the way it used to, as if her fingers were tired. But she knew it wasn't that. Her mind was wandering too much. She kept thinking of the concert hall, his reaction, the stunned staff members, the lingering quiet. She switched off the keyboard and stepped away. She needed fresh air outside. The neighborhood was calm. Children played at the corner. An old man sat on a bench feeding pigeons, and a woman closed the shutters of her shop while humming softly. Everything looked simple and peaceful. She sat on the edge of a low wall and watched the sky slowly shift colors. It reminded her of the stage lights, soft, warm, and comforting. A thought quietly found its way into her heart. Music had already given her so much peace, but maybe it was time for her to step into a bigger world, not to prove anything to the famous pianist, not to compete with anyone, but to grow just for herself. The idea scared her. She wasn't used to large crowds or important people. She had never taken a music class, never had a teacher, never even stepped into a real music school. She didn't have the right clothes, the right background, or the confidence people expected from performers. But she had a dream, and sometimes dreams are meant to push a person rather than comfort them. The next morning, she gathered the courage to look up the schedule for the pianist's upcoming charity concert. It was the same event he had been preparing for, the one she had unintentionally interrupted. The tickets were far too expensive for her budget. She sighed and closed the website. Still, something inside her wasn't ready to give up. She made tea for her mother and tried to distract herself with housework, but the thought of the concert kept returning. Later that afternoon, while wiping down the counter at the small cafe where she worked, she overheard two customers talking. They mentioned the charity concert, how the hall would be open an hour early for volunteers and organizing staff to set things up. She paused for a moment, thinking, could she volunteer? Maybe it would allow her to see the event from the inside. She didn't need to perform. Just being there might help her understand the world she wished to step into. Her heart started beating faster, not with fear, but with a quiet excitement. That evening, she filled out the simple form on the event's website. It only asked for basic information. She didn't mention anything about playing the piano. She simply wrote that she wanted to help. 2 days later, she received an email confirming her place as a volunteer. She almost dropped her phone from shock. She read the message 3 times to be sure. The event required her to arrive early, assist with seating preparations, guide guests, and help backstage when needed. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud of herself for taking a step, no matter how small. The day of the concert arrived sooner than she expected. She woke up before sunrise, washed her face with cold water, and chose the neatest clothes she owned. They weren't fancy, but they were clean and simple. Her mother noticed how nervous she looked and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Just be yourself, her mother said softly. She nodded, took a deep breath, and left the house. The concert hall looked even bigger than she remembered. Volunteers were already bustling around, carrying boxes, placing programs on seats, and checking lights. She introduced herself quietly and joined the team. Everyone was busy but kind, and she didn't feel out of place. At one point, she was asked to help backstage. She walked carefully, stopping to straighten a stand or shift a chair whenever needed. The energy backstage was different, focused, intense, and full of small, hurried movements. She glanced around and noticed the grand piano sitting under a soft spotlight, waiting. Even untouched, it carried a presence, as if it knew it was the heart of the evening. She took a moment to look at it. Her fingers tingled slightly. She imagined what it would feel like to sit there, breathe in the quiet, and let music flow freely. But she reminded herself she wasn't here to play. She was just part of the team. Then she heard voices approaching. The famous pianist walked in with event organizers surrounding him, going over the plan for the night. He looked as confident as ever, yet she sensed a seriousness in him she hadn't seen before. She lowered her gaze and continued adjusting chairs, hoping he wouldn't notice her. But he did. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. He paused mid-sentence. She quickly looked away, not wanting any tension to return. He didn't say anything and continued toward the piano. The staff around him discussed cues, lighting changes, and timing. She tried to keep her focus on her task, but she couldn't help glancing at him. He sat before the piano and pressed a few keys, tuning his senses to the instrument. His expression softened slightly, as it often does when an artist meets their craft. Then something unexpected happened. He looked up again, this time directly at her. "Are you volunteering tonight?" he asked calmly. She froze for a second, then nodded. Yes, just helping. Her voice was soft but steady. The organizers continued talking, but he remained quiet for a moment, watching her with a thoughtful expression, not mocking, not cold, just thoughtful. She stepped back, giving him space, and continued with her duties. She felt her chest tighten with nervousness. She hoped she hadn't done anything wrong. Minutes later, one of the staff members hurried toward her. We need someone to help guide performers backstage during program changes. Would you mind doing that? She agreed, even though the idea of standing so close to performers was intimidating. As she moved to stand near the side curtain, she caught a glimpse of the audience entering through the main doors. People dressed in beautiful clothes, chatting excitedly, carrying programs in their hands. She felt small compared to all of it, but she stayed focused. She didn't know that fate had already decided her night would be far more than just guiding people. She didn't know that this evening would test her courage in a way she never imagined, and she definitely didn't know that before the night ended, she would once again find herself at a piano, this time in front of hundreds of people. But for now, she simply stood by the curtain, unaware that everything was about to change. The hall was filled with a soft hum of voices as people settled into their seats. From where she stood near the side curtain, she could see glimpses of the audience, rows and rows of people dressed in their finest clothes, talking quietly, waiting for the concert to begin. The warm lights above the stage glowed softly, giving the room a gentle golden color. Her hands were slightly cold. She rubbed them together slowly, trying not to look nervous. She reminded herself that she wasn't here to perform. She was just helping. All she had to do was guide performers and listen to instructions. Nothing more. But a small part of her heart kept whispering that something unusual was unfolding tonight. The famous pianist stepped onto the stage for the opening number. The crowd fell silent almost instantly, waiting for his first touch on the keys. He adjusted the bench, closed his eyes for a moment, and began to play. The soft, delicate notes drifted across the hall like warm air. Even backstage, she felt the beauty of it. She watched from behind the curtain, feeling calm and yet strangely unsettled. He played with such control, such confidence, such ease, as if the piano were breathing through him. As he continued, she noticed something. His playing was flawless, but there was a slight heaviness in him, a seriousness that felt different from the rehearsals she had seen earlier. She wondered if he was tired or distracted. When he finished the first piece, the crowd burst into applause. He nodded politely, stood, and walked backstage to prepare for the next segment. He didn't look at anyone. His mind seemed somewhere far away. She stepped aside to let him pass, eyes lowered. But to her surprise, he stopped. Stay close, he said quietly. She looked up, confused. Me? He nodded once. Yes. Before she could ask why, he walked away, joining the organizers who were discussing the next part of the program. She stood still, trying to understand what he meant. Why did he want her close? What was he planning? Minutes later, he returned to the stage for another performance. But as soon as he started playing, something felt wrong. He pressed her wrong keys within seconds, something that rarely happened to someone of his skill. The audience didn't react, but she noticed. He paused, cleared his throat, and started again. Then it happened again. Another mistake. She could see the confusion in his eyes even from backstage. His hands were steady, but something inside him wasn't. He pressed on, finishing the piece with a tight expression. The audience clapped politely, unaware of the tension he felt. He walked backstage, took a slow breath, and shook his hands gently as if trying to relax them. She could tell he was upset with himself. One of the staff members approached him. "Are you okay? Do you need a break?" "I'm fine," he said quickly, though his voice sounded tight. But he wasn't fine. She knew he wasn't. She could see it in the way he paced, the way he looked at the piano, the way he pressed his lips together. He came to stand near her again. "How long have you been playing?" he asked suddenly. She blinked in surprise. I don't know. Since I was small." He nodded slowly. "You have something rare." She didn't know what to say. She had never heard anyone speak about her music like that, certainly not someone like him. He looked out toward the audience through a small gap in the curtain. "They expect perfection tonight," he said quietly. "But for some reason, I can't find it." She hesitated before speaking. Maybe it's not about perfection tonight." He turned to her with a thoughtful expression, as if her simple words carried more weight than she intended. After a long moment, he spoke again. "Would you help me?" She felt her breath catch. "Help you?" He nodded. "Join me for the final piece." Her heart almost stopped. I can't," she whispered, stepping back. I'm not ready for something like that. You are, he said, his voice calm but certain. I heard you. You play with honesty. That's something no one can teach. She shook her head. But this is your concert, and music should be shared. He interrupted gently. If you don't want to, I won't insist. But if you do, I believe it will be unforgettable. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked at the stage, then at the piano, then at him. The fear inside her was strong, but something else was stronger, the memory of how alive she felt when she played that day. In the empty hall, she took a slow breath. If I go out there, and I make a mistake, then we keep going, he said with a small smile. The audience will feel your courage more than any mistake. Her heart thumped loudly. She lowered her gaze, thinking deeply. Then, with a quiet voice, she said, I'll do it. He didn't celebrate, didn't clap, didn't show excitement. He simply nodded with respect, as if she had made a brave and honorable decision. The announcer stepped forward, preparing to introduce the final performance of the night. The pianist whispered to her, just feel the music. Don't look at the audience. Look at the keys. Let everything else fade. They walked onto the stage together. Gasps rolled through the hall. The audience clearly did not expect to see a volunteer from backstage stepping into the spotlight. Beside the world-famous pianist, she tried not to look at anyone. Her eyes stayed on the polished surface of the piano. The bench was large enough for two, but she still felt the heat of the lights and the weight of hundreds of eyes. They sat side by side. He began the opening notes soft, steady, comforting. She placed her fingers on the keys exactly as she had done all her life. When her turn came, she entered with a fragile softness, letting the melody build gently. The hall went completely silent. Her nerves faded with each note. The music pulled her in, wrapped around her, silenced all doubt. The duet felt natural, like two voices speaking the same language. Their styles were different, but instead of clashing, they blended, creating something new. Halfway through the piece, he paused to let her take a solo. She didn't even realize he had stopped playing. Her fingers moved as if guided by something deeper than thought. Her notes were warm, honest, full of the quiet emotions she carried every day. The audience sat frozen. When the piece finally ended, the last note hung in the air like a breath that no one dared release. Then the hall erupted. People stood up from their seats, clapping loudly, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. She stared at the piano, overwhelmed. She had never imagined applause like this, not in her entire life. The famous pianist stood and gestured toward her. Tonight, he said into the microphone, we were reminded that true music doesn't come from fame or training, it comes from the heart. And hers is full of music. The applause grew even louder. She finally looked at the audience. They weren't judging her. They weren't mocking her. They were celebrating her. Her eyes stung slightly, but she smiled. When they walked backstage, she felt lighter than ever. The pianist turned to her. I wasn't mocking you that day, he said quietly. I was careless, but you showed me something I had forgotten. She nodded slowly. Thank you for trusting me. He shook his head. No, thank you for reminding me why music matters. The night would stay with her forever, not because she had surprised the audience, not because she played on a grand stage, but because she found courage she didn't know she had, and because someone who once doubted her became the person who helped her shine. And as she walked out of the hall later that night, the world felt a little bigger, a little warmer, and full of new possibilities she had finally learned to believe she deserved.